The classroom was unusually quiet that evening. The final bell had rung more than an hour ago, and most of the students had already disappeared into the bustle of campus life. I stayed behind, my books spread across the desk in a patchwork of half-finished notes and open pages. The golden light of late afternoon filtered through the high windows, painting soft streaks across the floor. Somewhere in the distance, the faint echo of footsteps lingered, but here, inside these walls, it felt as though the world had slowed to a hush. I was bent over a paragraph, trying to focus, when I felt it, an almost imperceptible shift in the air, a presence close enough to draw my attention without a sound. Slowly, I lifted my gaze. Across from me, in the chair directly opposite mine, sat a woman I hadn't noticed enter. She carried herself with a calm, composed elegance, her posture straight, her hands resting gently in her lap. I recognized her almost instantly, though not from personal acquaintance. She was my teacher's sister, someone I'd glimpsed only once or twice before at school events. Older, certainly, though not in a way that distanced her. There was a quiet grace about her, a maturity that felt both unfamiliar and strangely magnetic. She hadn't spoken. She just sat there, her eyes steady on me, as though waiting. The silence wasn't uncomfortable exactly. It was heavy, charged, filling every corner of the room with an unspoken question. My heart, which had been calm moments ago, now beat with a noticeable rhythm, loud in the stillness. For a few seconds, I wasn't sure what to do. I glanced at the clock above the blackboard, the second hand ticking audibly, each movement amplifying the fact that time had slowed between us. My fingers tapped nervously against my pen. Her expression remained unreadable. Not stern, not overly warm, but thoughtful, as though she were studying me in ways she couldn't put into words. What struck me most was how deliberate her silence felt. She wasn't caught off guard, wasn't searching for words. She had chosen not to speak. Instead, she let the moment linger, and in that quietness I felt exposed in a way I hadn't expected. Every small sound, the rustle of my notebook, the faint creak of the chair as I shifted, seemed amplified against her stillness. Finally, I drew a breath and sat back, forcing myself to meet her gaze. Her eyes, a shade darker than her sister's, carried something layered inside them, patience, wisdom, maybe even a trace of weariness. Yet beneath that, I thought I glimpsed curiosity. It was strange, sitting there with her across from me, not a word exchanged, and yet an entire conversation unfolding silently between us. I didn't know why she had come, or what she wanted, but something told me this was not a coincidence. She had chosen this seat, this moment, and I was left caught between intrigue and hesitation. And though neither of us had spoken, I already sensed that whatever this was, it was only the beginning. The silence between us stretched like a taut string. I could feel it in the way my breath seemed louder, the way the small noises of the classroom, the faint hum of the ceiling fan, the occasional creak of wood, suddenly filled every space. She didn't shift in her seat. She didn't fidget. Instead, she sat perfectly at ease, her presence calm, as if she had been waiting for me to acknowledge her. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words stayed caught in my throat. She wasn't just another woman sitting across from me. She was my teacher's sister. That fact alone wrapped the moment in an odd mixture of respect and nervousness. Yet there was something disarming about her. She seemed comfortable in the quiet, as if silence was a language she spoke fluently. When her lips finally parted, her voice was softer than I expected, low, deliberate, carrying just enough warmth to soften the edges of her question. "Do you always stay behind this late?" It wasn't just the words that struck me. It was the way she asked them. Her tone didn't carry judgment or curiosity alone. It was measured, like she was testing the air between us. I nodded, my voice unsteady at first as I admitted that I liked the stillness, that I often found it easier to study when the classroom had emptied. She tilted her head slightly, and a faint smile appeared at the corner of her lips. The movement was small, but it shifted something inside me. I noticed how the light caught in her hair as it fell loosely over her shoulder, how her eyes seemed to take in more than my words, as if she was reading the unspoken things too. Her fingers rested on the table, long and graceful, tracing the grain of the wood absent-mindedly. There was nothing hurried about her gestures. Each movement carried a certain poise. Yet I thought I caught something else there, a kind of hesitation, quickly masked by her composed exterior. I found myself studying her in return. She was older, yes, but in a way that only deepened the sense of presence she carried. Not distant, not unapproachable, just layered, with stories I couldn't see yet. As we exchanged a few more words, The tension eased but didn't disappear. It transformed into something quieter, heavier, like a current running just beneath the surface. Each sentence she spoke made me want to lean closer, to catch every nuance of her voice. And though our conversation was simple, about books, about how silence could be either heavy or comforting, I felt as though we were talking about something far more significant, hidden beneath the casual words. By the time I glanced down at my notes again, my pen forgotten in my hand, I realized the truth. I was no longer focused on my studies. My attention had shifted entirely to her. The way she sat across from me, composed yet quietly vulnerable, and the unspoken question in her eyes that made me wonder why she had chosen this seat, in this moment, with me. The conversation grew easier, almost without my realizing it. What had started as careful, measured exchanges slowly opened into something more natural. She asked about the book I had been reading, her eyes glancing toward the open pages on my desk. I explained it clumsily at first, fumbling with words, but she listened, really listened, in a way that made me forget my awkwardness. Her focus didn't waver, and there was no impatience in her gaze. Instead, she leaned slightly forward, elbows resting lightly on the desk, as though my thoughts held a weight worth considering. Her presence made me sharper, more aware of the way my own voice sounded. I found myself wanting to impress her, not with grand gestures but with honesty. She asked questions that weren't just polite, they were thoughtful, and her replies carried the kind of wisdom born from experience. When she spoke, her words were steady, her tone calm, but beneath it I sensed something fragile, like she didn't often have conversations where people truly saw her. At one point, she reached across the desk to adjust the corner of my notebook that had curled upward. Her fingers lingered a moment longer than necessary, and though it was the smallest touch, barely a brush against the paper, it left me acutely aware of how close her hand was to mine. I almost moved my fingers to close the gap, but something inside held me back. Instead, I let the moment pass, though the warmth of it stayed with me. She laughed softly when I admitted my habit of overthinking everything. The sound was gentle but unguarded, carrying with it a glimpse of who she was beyond the careful exterior. I noticed how her head tilted slightly when she laughed, her hair slipping forward. Without thinking, I offered her a smile in return, and for a second, her eyes softened in a way that made my chest tighten. It struck me how different she felt compared to people my age. There was no rush in her speech, no restless need to fill silence. Every pause between us seemed purposeful, every glance deliberate. She carried herself with a kind of grace that drew me in, yet there was something about the way her gaze lingered on me that felt unspoken, as if she was searching for something too. The longer we talked, the less I noticed the empty classroom around us. The fading sunlight painted the walls in muted gold, shadows stretching longer with each passing minute, yet I felt anchored here, at this desk across from her. It was as though time had slowed just for us, allowing space for this fragile connection to take shape. By the time I looked down again at my neglected notes, I realized the truth. I hadn't just been talking with her. I had been sharing pieces of myself without hesitation, and in her steady, attentive gaze, I felt an unexpected connection take root, quiet, subtle, but undeniable. As the minutes passed, our conversation wove itself into something effortless. Though beneath it all, a quiet current of tension hummed. I had begun to notice small details I might have overlooked before. The way her eyes brightened when she listened intently, the faint crease that appeared near her lips when she was trying not to laugh, and the rhythm of her breath when silence settled between us. Every detail mattered now. Every gesture seemed magnified. At one point, she leaned forward, resting her forearm lightly against the desk. The movement closed the space between us, and though it was natural, casual, I felt the shift immediately. The room, once vast and quiet, suddenly felt smaller, more intimate. Her perfume, faint but steady, reached me, a warm, delicate scent that seemed to settle into the air and make the silence softer. I pretended to look down at my notes, but my attention betrayed me. I could feel the warmth of her nearness, the subtle energy of someone occupying not just space, but thought. Her presence was grounding yet electric, leaving me caught between wanting to look away and wanting to look longer. When she laughed again, this time at something I said about always losing my pens, she instinctively reached out, her hand brushing the edge of my sleeve before pulling back. The contact was light, fleeting, yet it burned into me with startling clarity. My heart skipped, not from the touch alone, but from the quiet ease with which she gave it, like it wasn't calculated, just natural. Then, without warning, she leaned closer still. I didn't realize how near she had come until she lifted her hand toward me. Her fingers brushed against my shoulder, adjusting the collar of my shirt where it had folded awkwardly inward. The gesture was simple, almost maternal in excuse, yet it carried something unspoken beneath it. Her touch lingered for half a heartbeat longer than necessary, soft against the fabric, before retreating. I froze in that instant, every sense heightened. The warmth of her hand seemed to echo even after it was gone. I glanced at her, and for the first time, I thought I saw it, hesitation flickering behind her eyes, as if she too realized the weight of what she'd done. But she masked it quickly with a small smile, composed, graceful, as though nothing had passed between us. Still, the air told a different story. The silence that followed wasn't the same as before. It wasn't empty. It was charged, filled with an awareness neither of us dared to name aloud. My chest tightened, caught between the thrill of closeness and the careful restraint of knowing this was uncharted territory. I picked up my pen again, trying to steady myself, but the words on the page blurred. All I could think about was her leaning forward, her fingers grazing my shoulder, and how something so small could shift the entire atmosphere between us. In that quiet, I realized, this wasn't just a conversation anymore. Something had begun to change. The air in the classroom felt heavier now, though not in a suffocating way. It was the weight of something fragile, something unspoken pressing gently at the edges of our words. I had never been so aware of a silence as I was in that moment. And yet, when she finally broke it, her voice carried a softness that immediately drew me in. "You know," she began, her gaze resting not on me but on the books scattered between us. "It's strange how easy it is to be invisible, even in rooms full of people who should know you." Her words hung there, quiet but sharp, and I felt the vulnerability laced inside them. She didn't look up right away. Instead, she traced the edge of the desk with her fingertip, as though grounding herself in the movement. When her eyes finally lifted, they held a depth that startled me. I hesitated, unsure if I should respond. She was my teacher's sister, someone I barely knew, and yet she had entrusted me with a confession that felt deeply personal. I cleared my throat and admitted softly, "I know what you mean. I've always felt like I'm just another face in the background. Too young to matter, too unproven for anyone to really notice." Her eyes softened, and for the first time, the composure she wore so naturally seemed to slip. There was a quiet understanding there, as if my words had reached her in a place she rarely allowed others to see. For a moment, we just looked at each other, unguarded. The air between us thickened with something I couldn't name, a shared recognition of loneliness, of wanting to be seen not for appearances or roles, but for the quiet truths that linger beneath them. Almost without thinking, my hand shifted across the desk, stopping just short of hers. She noticed, her gaze flicking down to the space between our fingers. And then, hesitant, deliberate, she moved her hand closer, until the back of her fingers brushed lightly against mine. The contact was minimal, but it sent a current through me. Her skin was warm, delicate, and the gentleness of it carried more weight than if she had clasped my hand fully. It wasn't bold, it was tentative, a question asked in silence. I let my fingers graze against hers in return, answering without words. The connection was so slight it might have been accidental, but we both knew it wasn't. My heart beat faster, though my voice, when I finally spoke, was steadier than I expected. "Maybe," I said quietly, "we're not as invisible as we think. Not right now." Her lips curved into a small, almost wistful smile, her eyes holding mine a moment longer before she withdrew her hand, slowly, reluctantly, as though she too wasn't ready to let the moment go. And in that silence, I knew we had crossed an invisible line. Something fragile, something real, now lived between us. The light outside had dimmed into dusk, streaks of soft orange giving way to the deeper blues of evening. The classroom felt cocooned in its own stillness, as if the world beyond the walls no longer existed. I hadn't realized how much time had slipped away until she shifted in her chair and reached for her bag. A quiet sigh escaped her, not from impatience, but as though she were reluctant to end whatever this was between us. She rose slowly, smoothing the fabric of her blouse, her movements unhurried, graceful. I thought that was it. Our moment was over, but then she paused beside my desk instead of heading for the door. I tilted my head up to look at her, my chest tightening at the nearness of her. From this angle, the fading light cast a glow along her face, softening the lines of maturity into something achingly gentle. Without speaking, she placed a hand lightly on my shoulder. The weight was barely there, but it steadied me, grounding me in the present. Her palm was warm through the thin fabric of my shirt, and I felt the pressure not just on my shoulder but deep in my chest. I froze, afraid that moving would break the spell. She lingered, her hand resting with quiet assurance, before I slowly rose to my feet. That small act brought us even closer, and suddenly we were standing only inches apart. The world narrowed to the rhythm of our breaths, hers calm but just a little uneven, mine quickened in response. She lifted her hand from my shoulder but didn't step back. Instead, she brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, her elbow grazing against my chest in the motion. The contact was accidental, perhaps, but she didn't apologize, and I didn't move away. The space between us was charged, fragile, alive. Our eyes met, and in that long, unbroken gaze, it felt as if words would only diminish what was being said without sound. Her eyes carried something unguarded, hesitation, yes, but also a tenderness that made my throat tighten. I realized then how rare it must be for her to allow herself to be seen like this. The urge to close the distance, to step forward and let the moment unfold, pressed heavily against me. But restraint held me still. I could feel the same battle in her, the pull toward something undeniable and the quiet discipline of holding back. Her breath brushed against my cheek, close enough to feel, not close enough to bridge. She gave a faint smile, one that carried both longing and caution, before letting her hand fall gently to her side. No words were spoken. None were needed. The quiet affection of her touch, the near embrace, the mingling of breath, it was enough to etch itself into memory. And in that suspended moment, I knew the line between us had blurred beyond return. The room had grown quiet enough that I could hear the faint hum of the street lamps flickering on outside. The day had surrendered to evening, the golden light replaced by a softer, dim glow. Our conversation had slowed, yet the air between us carried something far heavier than words. She stood there for a moment longer, close enough that I could feel her presence lingering like warmth in the air. Her eyes searched mine, as though measuring the weight of what had passed between us. Then, almost reluctantly, she whispered, "I'm glad I sat down." The words were simple, yet they carried layers. Gratitude, hesitation, confession. I felt my chest tighten, and though my voice was quiet, it came out steady. "So am I." Her lips curved into the faintest smile, one that softened the tension but did not erase it. She reached for her bag again, adjusting the strap over her shoulder, and I thought this was where the moment would end, just two people holding on to a quiet connection before going their separate ways. But then she leaned closer. Not hurriedly, not boldly, but with the gentleness of someone giving in to something she had resisted for too long. I stood still, breath caught, as she tilted her head just enough to brush her lips against my cheek. It was not a rushed kiss. It was soft, lingering, the barest press of warmth that carried with it everything left unsaid. My skin burned where her lips touched, the tenderness of it sinking deeper than any embrace could have. For those few seconds, the world fell completely silent. When she pulled back, her face lingered near mine, close enough that I could see the faint flicker of doubt in her eyes. Doubt not about what she felt, but about whether it was allowed to exist. And yet, there was no regret. Only an unspoken acknowledgement that something real had taken root between us. She straightened slowly, her composure returning, though her hand brushed lightly against my arm as if to tether herself for just a moment longer. "Take care," she murmured, her voice steady but softer than before. I nodded, unable to do more than hold her gaze. "You too," I replied, the words sounding almost too small for the weight of what I felt. Then, with a final glance, she turned and walked toward the door. Her footsteps echoed in the empty classroom, steady but unhurried. I watched as she paused at the threshold, her hand on the frame, and for a moment I thought she might turn back. She didn't. She slipped quietly out, leaving behind only the faint trace of her presence, her scent in the air, the warmth of her touch, the echo of her kiss. I sank back into my chair, my books still open but forgotten. The notes before me blurred, irrelevant against the memory of her sitting across from me, of her hand brushing mine, of her lips on my cheek. It hadn't been a confession of love. It hadn't been a declaration. But it was something fragile, something real. And as the silence reclaimed the room, I knew with certainty, nothing between us would ever be the same again.